Most of us have either played or heard about the mission from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 called No Russian, where a player is participating in a false flag operation with an ultra-nationalist Russian terrorist organization to justify war on the United States. Luckily, that is a video game and this event never occurred. However, an event with like-minded traits almost did happen 50 years ago. A plan to kill your own citizens to justify a war may sound bizarre, to say the least. After all, most of us live in very safe communities in relatively safe countries, and we can relax knowing that the government does keep us relatively safe. The last individual or organization most of us would consider a threat to our own very existence is our own government, sworn to protect us against internal and external threat. However, in 1962, in the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Central Intelligence Agency requested a precise description of pretext, which would justify a US military intervention in Cuba. A week later, the Joint Chief of Staff, General Lyman Lemitzer, is proposing a strategy not only to create justification for war, but also create a massive amount of public support. The plan called for various false flag operations and asked for campaigns to generate terror on US soil, carried out by the CIA, but blamed on somebody else, the Cuban revolutionaries. This plan received the name Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was created not only to give the United States an excuse to launch a war, but also to rally the citizens of the state to demand a war. General Lemitzer aimed to provide this document as guidelines to achieve this, with the goal to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government, and to develop an international image of Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. Many ideas were suggested by General Lemitzer and his staff, from starting a planned fire on their own aircraft to simulate sabotage, and blowing up a US ship in Guantanamo Bay. However, as much as these events would justify military action, they would not gather the public support needed for one. What they needed was to create a fake and clear provocation from Cuba, which would display them as an unlawful rogue state, and in general, he had just the right plan in mind. In section 4 of the document, he does state that we could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even Washington. This terror campaign will target Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States, and they even specify that they could sink a boatload of civilians en route to Florida, and even mention that they can foster attempts on lives on Cuban refugees in the United States. In section 6, they also specify that the use of a MiG-type aircraft could provide additional provocation. These planes would be flown by US pilots, however, this caused another issue, as the United States simply didn't have any MiGs in their arsenal. Obtaining or modifying a MiG would be a serious risk to this mission, as the more people involved equals a higher risk of the mission being leaked. But they didn't need to convince any aviation experts or trained pilots, they needed to convince the average Joe working his normal 9-to-5 job, and they came up with the idea of painting an F-86 according to the camouflage which the Cuban Air Force used. This way, eyewitnesses spotting the attacks from a distance could be shown a picture of a MiG, and they would verify that this was the plane which they saw. Now, why kill Cubans when the very goal of the operation was to anger the American people for a war against Cuba? Wouldn't it be better to kill off American nationals or tourists visiting from abroad to justify that Cuba has become an aggressive rogue state? Yes, but no. After Fidel Castro took over Cuba in the Communist Revolution, leaving Cuba became pretty much forbidden. Regardless, a lot of people tried to escape it by boat and did their utmost best to reach international or even better American waters. This would in the eyes of the world look like the new communist Cuba was killing off people who was illegally leaving, making Cuba become the very definition of a terrorist state. Now, what became of this madness? Nothing. And nothing became of this madness as the plan was never implemented. If this plan was implemented, the world as we know it would most likely look different. The Third World War might have been over, or worst case scenario still ongoing. Or if not, it would have perhaps fueled the Soviet war machine to still exist. We simply cannot know. However, I need to underline how close this plan was to implementation. After all, it ended up on the desk of President John F. Kennedy. He was the last layer of implementation, but decided not to. As much as his whole career was often focused on his grudge with Fidel Castro, he would not use the lives of innocent civilians as a card in the game of politics. Operation Northwoods was in the end of the day just a signature away, and many consider this the event as the reason they believe in conspiracy theories. United States have since the release of the document said that this was the only time the US government have planned an attack on their own civilians. But after an event like this, can we really take their word for granted?